classic games from the NES have carried on for years, getting more games on more systems. Others are just admired treasures from a now long gone era of gaming. Then there are the other games that are still remembered and revered, but only on the rare occasion. One such distant memory is StarTropics, with its blend of action, RPG, and platforming. Even less remembered and probably unknown to a good number of people is StarTropics 2, Zoda's Revenge.
StarTropics 2, Zoda's Revenge came out very late in the life of the NES, coming out in March of 1994, and is kind of the reason why the series never went any further. It came out so late, it should have been saved and polished for a Super Nintendo title, and unfortunately has never been looked at with a lot of respect.
And yes, I know the happy video game nerd touched on this game already, but hey, he did Zombie Panic in Wonderland after me.
StarTropics 2 kept the same basic gameplay while changing some things as well. You could call them upgrades to the gameplay system, but sometimes they don't feel like it as much as they do at other times. Where in the first game everything was done in a grid, your movement, jumping, and the screen layout, now Mike can jump and walk in a diagonal, as well as change direction mid-air. While this can be very handy and allows for a wide range of platforming, the layout of the levels and puzzles is still mostly in a grid. So this makes things feel awkward on a number of occasions, but it's nothing you can't get used to.
Now this is not going to be a complaint for everyone, and in fact you may only dislike it if you're a fan of the first game, because in fact that first game was criticized originally for its grid-style gameplay, so take this criticism as you will.
The only other real complaint I can give for this game is it's a lot shorter than the first one, and a little easier. In fact, you can plow through a lot of these dungeons in about 10 minutes. The bosses, while some of them can catch you off guard, you don't need to expect to die too often. Again, this may only be a complaint if you become a purist of the first game. The dungeons and bosses are still fun. In fact, the short length can be a plus if you want the StarTropics feel, but don't want to take on a huge quest.
Now these are my only two real complaints about the game. Everything outside of that is just minor issues that doesn't really ruin the gameplay or hinder the overall experience. They just kind of make you turn up an eyebrow from time to time.
Things like Mike's colors not being consistent from gameplay to cutscenes, some of the repeating music themes, and even the larger amount of cheese within the story and character interactions. Alright, enough of that stuff. Let's get to the meat of the game. The game has a lot of charm, and I think it'd be a very fun title. You take on the role of Mike shortly after his triumph over the aliens under the leadership of Zoda. His uncle has been working non-stop to try and decode the writings found in the last game. Micah contacts you telepathically and gives your uncle a clue to decode the writings, and upon reciting these, you are propelled through time on your next adventure. So in this game, you don't travel from island to island to progress the chapters, you move from time and visit historical places and people. It's a decent idea to keep the feel of the first game, but not just repeat the first one, and for this I give it props. You land in your first destination of what I can assume is the Ice Age, weaponless, and must begin your trek, yes, weaponless. You eventually get an axe from the local caveman Tink, but I do kind of miss the yo-yo. This whole section of the story sets up just about everything you'll see gameplay-wise. Get used to falling through invisible holes to mini dungeons on the overworld map, and then getting used to that even more to solve puzzles in the main dungeons. It turns out that all the children have been kidnapped by something called Yum Yum, and you are destined to save them. And who are you to argue with such logic? You just traveled through time. Anything is possible at this point. You'll find many different enemies as you go through the game, mostly pertaining to the area and time you're in, but don't be surprised when they start showing up in other places. The enemies are small as blobs of slime, and rats, two as large as giant mummies, dinosaurs that shoot balls of energy, or giant snakes. The enemies get progressively harder as the game goes on, but there will always be the small fries that serve as an annoyance as their odd patterns of movement keep draining your life until you manage to get your one shot at them. The enemies are odd though, where a lot of games would have them classified and the smaller and weaker looking enemies would take fewer hits than the larger ones. This is not always the case. Don't be too surprised later on in the game where you'll have to fire on a large blob of slime for several shots, where your upgraded weapon can take down what was once the harder enemy to kill in just a few shots. To fight all these creatures out to kill you, you'll have a few weapons starting with the rock axe made by Tink. You still use your amazing throwing arm to throw your weapons, which is another reason why having the yo-yo would have been better to get back. You'll eventually upgrade to a dagger, and then later to a katana. How you throw a katana, I have no clue. He must have had one hell of an arm. You'll also get a psychic attack from Magician. This now acts like your main weapon did in the first game, becoming upgraded and having more strength and reach depending on your life. The power at first is pretty weak, only needed to solve one puzzle and kill the occasional enemy, but eventually it becomes much more useful than your normal weapon. After defeating Yum Yum in the Ice Age, you find a mysterious block. Once Micah contacts you again, you learn it is the Tetrad, and you must find them all through time and piece them together as they hold the secrets of the alien homeworld. So you set out to find these Tetris blocks in ancient Egypt, Renaissance Italy, with Sherlock Holmes in England, and while finding out the secret of Dracula, and even return to Sea Island from the first game. Unlike the first game, there are more mini puzzles and things that happen in the overworld, such as finding your way through a hedge maze and fetching a pizza for Cleopatra. There are also a massive amount of mini dungeons that you usually fall in during these overworld puzzles. As you go through the story, you will find that Zoda is back and trying to get the Tetrads as well, and becomes the main boss after his first appearance, bringing familiar enemies and boss battles. Get used to seeing arrow floors that move you around, disappearing floors, and lots of pits with moving platforms. You will usually have a mini boss and then the main boss in each chapter, in either the same dungeon or before getting to the main dungeon. Some of these bosses are ridiculously easy, especially early on and when Zoda has two forms. And others can be rather hard and based a lot on luck of the draw.
I'm not claiming StarTropics 2 is a great game without faults. It's more like a hidden gem that has never been polished. It still has its worth and it's great to have, but you'll never see a true shine. There's a lot going on in this game, and though it's shorter than the first, there's still a lot to see. It is not a game that deserves to be overlooked as much as it is, and it deserves a good chance. You should be able to find it in your local shop pretty cheap, and if nothing else, it's on Virtual Console. That's all there is for this RetroActive. I'll see you next time.